Hello, could you help me grow this channel? Subscribing is totally free. Just one click below this video is all it takes.
I found out my entire family went to Hawaii without me through a photo. Of all things, a goddamn photo. It was my sister Lindsay who posted it first, naturally, grinning with that smug face of hers, holding a pineapple drink on the beach like she was the goddamn queen of Waikiki. My parents were there too, awkwardly crammed into a selfie on a rented catamaran, along with my brother-in-law Mark, his 2 kids from a previous marriage, and even that creepy guy from my uncle's side who never talks unless there's whiskey involved. And there I was back home, sitting on the floor of my laundry room, trying to wrestle a sock out of the washing machine filter while this ridiculous scene popped up on my phone. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it was an old photo, one of those Facebook memory things. But no, the timestamp said yesterday. They had been on that beach yesterday. It took me all of 20 minutes to confirm it. More photos, tagged locations, sunburned noses, Lindsay's caption that read, "Much needed break with the whole fam. Missed a few, but we'll catch up when we're back." The few she meant? Just me. I called my mom immediately, her voice all sing-songy like she was trying to pretend the wind noise wasn't from an actual tropical paradise. "Oh, honey," she said, pausing just long enough to sound fake empathetic. "We just assumed you'd be too busy with work and everything. You've been saying how slammed you are lately." Slapped in the face wouldn't have felt much different. Let me give you the real background. I'm 45. I work as a medical billing coordinator for a small clinic in Pennsylvania. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and I'm good at it. I've taken care of our aging dad's pharmacy trips, his insurance paperwork, his sleep apnea appointments. I was the one who handled the emergency room mess when he fell last November, and Lindsay didn't pick up her phone for 11 straight hours. And no, I didn't complain about it. That's what you do when you're the oldest daughter. You handle things. You mop up the chaos. You cancel your plans. You swallow your bitterness with a smile. But apparently, I'd been so damn reliable, they just decided I wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't even about the beach or the travel. I can't even remember the last time I took a vacation that didn't involve someone else's hospital room or a funeral. It was about what it said, what it screamed, really. You're not one of us. You're the help. You're the one who keeps the trains running while the rest of us sip margaritas in the sun. I didn't even confront Lindsay at first. I stewed on it for a few days, waiting to see if anyone would call, text, say anything. Nothing. Just more pictures. More goddamn hashtags. More passive-aggressive captions like, "So blessed and family is everything." I wanted to smash my phone against the kitchen tiles, but instead I poured myself a 3rd glass of wine and scrolled deeper. And that's when I saw it. There was a shot Lindsay didn't realize had a reflection, taken outside a fancy resort window, with everyone dressed up for what I assume was dinner. In the glass behind them, mirrored faintly but unmistakably, was our dad, standing next to someone who looked a hell of a lot like Dr. Merrick, the neurologist, the one I'd begged my mom to schedule an appointment with after Dad started forgetting the oven was on. She told me she hadn't gotten around to it yet, but there he was in Hawaii with Dr. Merrick, laughing. Now maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't Merrick, but it was enough to light the fire in my gut. The next day I showed up at my own house, which, at that moment, felt less like mine and more like a temporary Airbnb. Lindsay and Mark had squatted in for the past 7 months while they renovated their own home. I stood in the entryway looking at their hiking boots by the door, Mark's smelly gym bag in the hallway, Lindsay's ring light still set up in my guest bedroom where she'd been recording wellness content for her 30 Instagram followers. I thought about the way she told me last fall. "It's just until we fix the mold in the bathroom car. Don't be uptight. Not $1 of rent, not one offer to help with groceries or utilities," but I kept telling myself it was temporary. That family helps family, but apparently that contract only works one way. I didn't explode. I didn't call her. I didn't scream or throw dishes. What I did was walk up to my bedroom, open my laptop, and draft a 30-day notice. I labeled it courtesy eviction, effective immediately. I printed it, folded it neatly, and slid it under her bedroom door. Then I went downstairs, made myself a sandwich, and ate it with the calm of someone who has finally decided to stop swallowing everyone else's bullshit. The silence in the house was delicious. That night, I got a text from Lindsay, short and cold. Seriously? I didn't answer. But just before I went to bed, I stared at that photo one last time. The reflection in the window, the quiet truth screaming beneath all that sunscreen and phony affection. And I started making a plan. Because here's what I want to ask you right now as you're watching this and maybe shaking your head. What would you do if your family left you out on purpose? Not because you were busy, not because they forgot, but because they decided you didn't belong? Would you let it slide? Or would you finally make some goddamn room in your own life by clearing them out of it? And that's exactly what I was about to do. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a house after betrayal has visited it. Not the usual quiet that accompanies late evenings or early mornings, but a charged, humming stillness that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally say what everyone knows is true. That was the atmosphere in my house during the final days of Lindsay and Mark's temporary stay, which by that point had stretched into 7 months of entitlement, manipulation, and passive-aggressive garbage that I had tolerated far longer than any sane person should have. When I think about it now, I wonder how many times I looked away from the mess because I was too afraid of what it would mean to confront it. Not just the freeloading or the messes they left behind, but the deeper truth that my sister had never once in our adult lives considered me an equal, and certainly not a priority. After I slipped the notice under her door, I didn't hear from her for almost 24 hours, which was a minor miracle in itself, given her usual tendency to text every 5 minutes with nonsense like, "Do you have almond milk or should I Instacart?" Or, "Can I borrow your blow dryer again? Mine's on the fritz. LOL. But when she finally responded, it was with a single perfectly passive-aggressive text that read, "Seriously?" As if the act of reclaiming my own home was some unforgivable sin that made me the villain in a story where she had cast herself as the long-suffering protagonist. I didn't reply because, frankly, there was nothing left to explain. I had spent years of my life bending over backwards for her, letting her crash on my couch during her divorce, driving her to job interviews when she didn't have a car, even pretending to believe her lies when she swore she didn't know her last boyfriend was still married. And now, after all that, she had the gall to exclude me from a family vacation, not by accident, not through forgetfulness, but by deliberate, conscious choice, and then act offended when I dared to reclaim the space she had used like her personal hotel suite. Over the next few days, she tried to pretend like nothing had changed. She walked around the house barefoot, still wearing her overpriced athleisure outfits, sipping kombucha from my glassware, leaving half-eaten yogurt containers in the fridge like she was marking territory. Mark, who rarely spoke more than 3 words to me even when we were all sitting at the same table, seemed to have decided that silent judgment was his best move, and he stuck to it with robotic precision. His face permanently twisted into a look that said he couldn't wait to get out of my toxic energy, as Lindsay once called it during an argument over laundry detergent. But time kept ticking. Day 1 turned into day 10. Day 10 became day 20. I didn't say a word about the countdown, didn't remind them of the date, didn't offer a checklist or a nudge. I simply waited, going about my day as if I wasn't watching them slowly unravel. By the 3rd week, Lindsay started to break. She cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon, her voice sugary sweet, asking if maybe they could stay just a few more weeks because their contractor ghosted them, and the mold situation was way worse than they thought. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "No," with the kind of stillness that made her blink like she'd just been slapped. No explanation, no compromise, just no. And on day 31, I changed the locks. I didn't do it in a dramatic way. There were no shouting matches, no thrown suitcases, no public meltdowns. I had already warned them, already handed them their grace period. And if they chose not to take it seriously, that was on them. I gave them until noon. At 12:30, I paid a locksmith to come and rekey every door in the house. I stacked the remaining boxes on the porch, neatly labeled with masking tape. I left a note on top that said, "Let me know where to forward your mail." When Lindsay pulled into the driveway later that evening, she didn't even get out of the car. She just sat there behind the wheel, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling our mother, our aunt, maybe even some of her friends to build her case, to spread the story that I'd lost it, that I was being cruel, vindictive, overdramatic. That's always been her defense. To twist the narrative into one where she's the victim and I'm the cold, uptight older sister who never learned how to have fun. But this wasn't about fun. This was about respect. This was about boundaries. And this was about finally drawing a goddamn line in the sand after years of being walked over like a welcome mat. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I had my house back. I opened every window, lit a candle in every room, and poured myself a glass of wine so large it could have drowned a small animal. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. It was mine. I slept with both fans on, no headphones, no white noise, no earplugs. I didn't worry about doors creaking open, or Lindsay yelling on her phone at midnight, or Mark stomping around in his stupid flip-flops. But that peace didn't last long, because the very next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her tone was icy and clipped in a way that made me straighten up before she even said the words. "Your sister is devastated," she began, skipping right over hello. "We're calling a family meeting Sunday. Be there." And that's when I knew. Whatever came next, it wasn't just about the house anymore. Walking into my parents' house that Sunday felt less like entering a home and more like stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written, where my lines didn't matter because the story had already been decided without me. The air inside was stiff, as though it had absorbed the tension everyone had been marinating in for the last few days, and the second I crossed the threshold, I could feel every eye in the room snap toward me with the same silent accusation. "How are you?" They didn't need to say it out loud. Their faces did all the talking. My mother sat rigid in her favorite armchair, hands clasped in her lap like a judge about to read a sentence. My father, who hadn't even acknowledged my eviction text, looked confused, as he often did lately, his gaze drifting between faces without anchoring to anyone. Lindsay was perched on the edge of the couch, arms crossed tightly over her chest, Mark standing behind her with the posture of a man pretending he had more important things to be doing. I didn't bother to sit. The silence dragged, thick and performative, the kind that insists you're the one who should break it because clearly you're the problem. When no one spoke, I raised an eyebrow and said, "So what's this about?" As if I didn't already know, as if I hadn't predicted every syllable of the ambush that was surely coming. And right on cue, my mother leaned forward, voice trembling with the kind of false disappointment she had perfected over the years, and said, "We just don't understand what's going on with you lately, Karen." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but from the sheer predictability of it. That tone, that vague accusation masked as concern, had followed me since childhood. It was the same voice she used when I said I didn't want to go to church, or when I dyed my hair red in college, or when I refused to babysit Lindsay's kids for the 5th weekend in a row. It always meant the same thing: stop making things difficult. Stop having boundaries. Just go along with the plan we made without you. Mark, who rarely bothered to pretend he had any warmth toward me, jumped in with his usual brand of smug irritation, saying, "You really blindsided us, Karen. Kicking family out like that? Over what? A vacation?" His voice dripped with incredulity, as though I had committed some cardinal sin by asserting ownership over my own damn home. I turned to him slowly, gave him a look that could peel paint, and said, "It wasn't about the vacation, Mark. It was about the lie. And the fact that you two have been using my house as a free Airbnb while pretending I don't exist." Lindsay flinched but didn't break. She's always been good at this, at pivoting, at performing hurt while never taking accountability. "Karen," she said, voice quivering like she was seconds away from tears, "we didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought you were really busy and—" "Don't," I cut in, my voice low and sharp enough to slice through her performance. "Don't lie to my face when you've already lied behind my back. You planned that trip for months. You made sure I wouldn't know. And then you tried to act like it was some spontaneous thing that just happened without me. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence this time wasn't performative. It was brittle, exposed. My mother's jaw tightened, and Lindsay looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers like a child caught cheating on a test. That's when I pulled the trump card, the one I had been saving, the one that would drag the truth into the light whether they liked it or not. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small stack of papers, and laid them on the coffee table with a firm hand. Printed emails, subject lines, timestamps. An entire thread between Lindsay and my mother, going back almost 5 months. The subject line on the first one was simple and clean. Let's leave her out of this one. I didn't need to explain it. The words spoke louder than any monologue I could deliver. Lindsay's voice broke the quiet with a sharp intake of breath, and my mother paled in a way I hadn't seen since the day my grandmother died. You went through my emails? My mother finally asked, voice trembling now for real, not out of performance but genuine panic. I didn't flinch. No, I said, calm and steady. Your dumb iCloud account is still linked to the old iPad you gave me 3 years ago. Notifications just started popping up one day. I figured if you didn't want me reading them, maybe you shouldn't be writing things like this. The room became a vacuum. For the first time in possibly my entire life, they were speechless. No spin, no gaslighting. Just the hard, ugly truth sitting on the table like a snake with its fangs bared. My father, bless him, finally spoke. Not to me, not to Lindsay, but to no one in particular, murmuring, I didn't know. I thought we were all going together, which honestly might have been the saddest sentence I've ever heard come out of his mouth. Because he hadn't known. Of course he hadn't. They hadn't told him either. They had taken him along like he was cargo. Not a person. And the worst part? They didn't trust me with the truth. Not even about him. It hit me then that this wasn't just about a vacation. It wasn't even about the house or the rent or the text they never sent. This was about control. About who gets to be the good one, the trusted one, the fun one. And it had never been me. I stared at my sister, at the face I used to trust without question, and said, You wanted me out of the way. So you got what you wanted. Now you're out of mine. I turned and walked out before they could speak, because nothing they said would have changed what I already knew. And while the door closed softly behind me, it felt heavier than any door I'd ever shut in my life. Not because it was loud, but because it was final, or so I thought. There's a strange kind of numbness that takes root after a confrontation, a quiet hum just beneath the skin where anger used to live, like a storm that's passed but left the sky permanently dark. In the days that followed that so-called family summit, I moved through my routines with mechanical precision, making coffee without tasting it, folding laundry that had already been folded, standing in the shower until the hot water gave out, and even then not feeling the cold. What I had always feared, the collapse, the disintegration of familial loyalty, the painful reality that blood isn't a guarantee of anything, had finally happened, not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow, quiet unspooling that felt worse somehow, because it made me question whether any of it had been real in the first place. And in that silence, in the vacuum of after, I started to see things I hadn't noticed before, things that had always been there, hiding beneath the surface like mold under wallpaper. The first was the financial trail. It started, oddly enough, with a misplaced utility bill. I'd been cleaning out a drawer in the hallway, a task I only tackled when I needed something tedious to focus on, when I found a crumpled water bill with Mark's name scrawled on the back, along with what looked like a budget breakdown. Curious, and maybe still angry enough to justify snooping, I followed the breadcrumb trail from there. Old bank envelopes, receipts with reimbursement highlighted, and eventually an email Lindsay had printed and left in a shared folder on my home printer, probably by mistake. The email was addressed to Mark from what looked like a staffing agency, and it confirmed something I hadn't known until that moment. Mark had lost his job over 6 months ago, not working from home, not contracting on the side, but unemployed, cut off, and apparently too proud to admit it. That was the moment when it hit me, not all at once, but like a slow squeeze around the ribs. They hadn't just been staying in my house out of convenience. They hadn't been between homes or figuring things out. They had been hiding. They were drowning in silence, and my home was their lifeboat, one they'd boarded without asking and with no intention of leaving until it either sank or I threw them overboard. And the worst part wasn't the lie. It was the assumption that I'd never put the pieces together, that I'd keep bending, keep accommodating, keep playing the role I'd always played while they took and took until there was nothing left. And that's when the resentment truly bloomed. Not loud, not fiery, but cold, clinical, focused. I started going back through everything, mentally cataloging every time Lindsay had brushed off my questions about their renovation, every time Mark had shrugged and said the contractor ghosted again, every time they'd used my space, my groceries, my utilities, my life, and offered nothing in return. I thought about the way my mother had looked at me in that living room, not with concern, but with quiet disappointment, like I was the child who had embarrassed her at a dinner party. I thought about the way Lindsay had twisted herself into a victim, even as she excluded me from my own family. And more than anything, I thought about the vacation, that beautiful sun-drenched escape they had all taken without me, and how it had been funded. That question gnawed at me, kept me up at night, and finally one evening, I called my cousin Rachel, the only one in the family with a shred of neutrality left. She'd been in Hawaii too, though not part of the core trip, and she'd mentioned offhand that she had some pictures I hadn't seen. "Why do you want them now?" she asked, her voice hesitant, like she could already sense the wound behind my request. I didn't answer. A few hours later, she emailed me a video clip from her phone. Shaky, low quality, but clear enough. It was taken at a beachside dinner, the kind of casual but expensive affair my parents never used to splurge on. And it showed the whole family laughing, eating, toasting cocktails while the ocean roared behind them. At first it was just painful to watch, and then I heard it. Lindsay's voice, clear as day, speaking to someone just off camera. "We can't tell Karen yet. She doesn't know about Dad. She'll make it a whole thing, and honestly, we don't have the energy to deal with her meltdown. It's better this way. Let her stay out of it. She's always too emotional." I paused the video. My hands were shaking, not from surprise, but from the cold recognition that all of this, had been calculated. The lie about me being too busy wasn't just about the vacation. It was a smokescreen, a distraction. The truth was buried underneath something far bigger than I had imagined. And Lindsay, of all people, had decided that I wasn't fit to handle it. That I couldn't be trusted with our father's condition. That I was too unstable, too reactive, too much. The problem was, she was right about one thing. I am emotional because I give a damn. Because I remember things they forget. The night Dad wandered off in the snow and I had to drive around the block for 2 hours until I found him near the pharmacy. The time he tried to use the TV remote to answer the phone. The moment I realized he didn't recognize my face for a few seconds and tried to cover it up by pretending to fall asleep. I'm not emotional because I'm weak. I'm emotional because this matters, because he matters. And they decided to shut me out. Not because I couldn't handle it, but because they couldn't handle me having a say. That night, I sat in the dark, that video still open on my laptop, and made a decision. If they didn't want me involved, then I would involve myself, not with a tantrum, not with a confrontation, but with the law. I started looking up medical power of attorney rules the next morning. I called Dad's primary physician. I spoke to an elder care lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I simply did what they had always counted on me not doing. I made a move. A quiet, strategic, undeniable move. And for the first time in this entire mess, I felt something dangerously close to power. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but clarity. Because now I knew what they were hiding, and I knew how to take it back. The thing about betrayal, especially when it comes from the people you're supposed to trust the most, is that it doesn't just break you in the moment. It rewires the way you remember everything that came before, like someone switched out the lenses on your memories without warning, and suddenly all the soft, warm light is gone. replaced by harsh fluorescents that show every crack, every lie, every carefully constructed illusion you mistook for unconditional love. In the days following my quiet decision to pursue medical power of attorney over my father, I moved through my life like someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to claim what had always been hers to begin with. Though the weight of what I was doing, and what it might cost me, pressed against my chest like a stone that would never fully lift. Getting the paperwork in motion wasn't hard, not in the practical sense. The lawyer I hired was efficient, professional, and slightly amused by how prepared I was, though I could tell she had seen the story before. The overlooked daughter, the emotional one, the one who wasn't invited to the secret meetings but showed up anyway, documents in hand, daring anyone to tell her she didn't belong. It was all by the book. I had the records. I had proof of my involvement in Dad's care. I had my name listed on prescriptions, on his emergency contact forms, on insurance paperwork. What I didn't have, at least not yet, was a clear understanding of just how deep the rot had gone, or how much of it had been painted over in bright, cheerful colors by people who insisted everything was fine while the floorboards were already caving in. The news that I had filed for medical POA hit my family like a grenade tossed through a stained glass window. The first to call was my mother, who left me a long, trembling voicemail that began with, "How could you?" and ended with, "You don't understand what you're doing," her voice cracking under the strain of fury and fear. She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. I had crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed, had disrupted the unspoken agreement that I would always remain on the periphery, reliable enough to clean up the messes, but never trusted to make the decisions that mattered. The second to reach out, and this was a surprise, was Mark, who sent me a cold professional email that read like something out of a courtroom drama, referencing unilateral actions, family unity, and legal overreach, as though he hadn't spent the last 7 months living in my house rent-free while lying about his job status and vacationing on someone else's dime. Lindsay, however, said nothing. Not a text, not a call, not a note slipped under the door. For days, her silence was louder than all their shouting combined. And part of me, against my better judgment, kept wondering if she was hurt or just calculating if she was sitting in some overpriced cafe with her phone in her lap, planning her next move while pretending she hadn't just lost control of the story she'd been writing for years. But then, late one night, a knock came at my door. Not loud, not urgent, just soft enough to feel like a test. And when I opened it, there she was, dressed in workout clothes, no makeup, no filter, no Instagram-ready smile, just Lindsay, the sister I used to share a room with. The girl who once cut my bangs too short because she wanted us to look the same. She didn't ask to come in, she just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, and after a long pause she said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." I didn't respond. I stepped aside, let her in, and we sat at the kitchen table like two strangers who had once known everything about each other and now couldn't agree on what time it was. She didn't cry, which surprised me. She didn't yell either. Instead, she spoke quietly, like someone walking barefoot across broken glass, and she told me the truth, or at least her version of it. She said the vacation had been planned, yes, and yes, they had excluded me on purpose. Not out of cruelty, but out of what she claimed was necessity. She said our dad had been declining faster than expected, that his memory was slipping in ways she hadn't anticipated, that he had moments now, real terrifying moments, where he couldn't remember where he was, who she was, or even how to use the phone. She said Mom didn't want to worry me, that they were trying to shield me because they knew how I get. That phrase, "how I get," landed like a slap. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize what she'd said. But she just kept going, as if confessing was enough, as if words alone could scrub away the choices they'd made. She said they took him to Hawaii because they wanted to give him one last good memory before it all slipped away, before the man we knew vanished entirely, and that they didn't trust me not to make it about myself, not to fall apart or argue or demand medical opinions, when what they wanted was peace. a moment of calm before the storm. And maybe she was right. Maybe I would have made it about myself. Maybe I would have pushed too hard, asked too many questions, refused to accept the rosy narrative they were clinging to. But none of that changed the fact that they took away my choice. They decided I wasn't strong enough to know, to help, to be there. And that, more than the lies, more than the eviction, more than the carefully orchestrated exclusion, was what broke me. I told her I'd already filed. I told her it wasn't negotiable. And she didn't argue. She just sat there staring down at her hands like they might offer her some answer she couldn't find in my eyes. And after a long silence, she said, "He still asks about you, sometimes, on the good days." That was the moment my breath caught, and the tears that had been hiding behind my eyes for weeks finally began to fall. Not in great heaving sobs, but quietly, like a leak in a pipe you didn't know was there until the ceiling gives out. I don't remember what we said after that. I think we just sat there, two women bound by blood and broken by it, listening to the sound of our father's favorite clock ticking away in the living room. A reminder that time doesn't stop. Not for grief, not for regret, not for anything. The paperwork went through. I was granted medical power of attorney within the month. No one contested it. My father didn't understand what it meant. Not fully. But when I sat beside him one afternoon and explained that I would be helping him with his doctors, his appointments, his decisions, he looked at me, really looked at me, and for a flicker of a second, something sparked behind his eyes. "You always were the strong one," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just as a simple, unquestionable fact. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the truth I'd been chasing all along. Or maybe, like so many things in families, it was just a moment, fleeting, fragile, and gone before you could hold it. But I held on to it anyway, because sometimes that's all you can do.